name is Algernon Austin. I'm the Director for Race and Economic Justice at the Center for Economic and Policy Research. The Center for Economic and Policy Research, also known as CEPR, was established to promote democratic debate on the most important economic and social issues that affect people's lives. Welcome to the second installment of our four-part webinar series commemorating the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. These events are brought to you by the Center for Economic and Policy Research, CEPR, as part of the Full Employment for All Coalition. You can find out more about the coalition at fullemploymentforall.org. Before we begin our great panel on the continuing struggle for jobs, I want to remind you that we have two other panels over the next 2 Wednesdays this month. Please register for next week's panel, The Continuing Struggle for Freedom, in the link provided. There should be a link that you can see, or you can go to the cepr.net website to find it. The Continuing Struggle for Freedom will focus on our current civil rights struggles, and the panelists will also unpack the implications of recent Supreme Court decisions. That will be a great webinar, and I hope that you register for it. The moderator for today's panel is Callie Grant, who is the Associate Director of the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality, and I'll hand it over to Callie right now. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Algernon, and thanks so much, everyone, for joining us on this Wednesday afternoon. Hopefully everyone has, settled in and gotten some lunch in and are excited for this panel, because I definitely am. We have such a fantastic group of people here with us today. First, I'm excited to introduce Noelle Thiessen, who's a policy consultant at CLASP. I'm also very excited to introduce Ted Bettner, senior researcher at the Ohio River Valley Institute. And lastly, I am delighted to introduce Brittany Johnston, who's a research analyst at the Native Nations Institute of the University of Alabama. So just a little bit of overview of how today will work. We're going to take the next 40 to 45 minutes or so for the panel discussion, and then we're going to hold a little time at the end for some audience Q&A. But we'd really love it if, as we are going, you can pop questions into the area where you can do that, and that way when we have the question portion at the end, we can just turn to those and already have a good set of them lined up, hopefully. So yeah, that's how that'll work. And just to set the context a little bit before we jump into things, August 28th will mark the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. It's often forgotten that Dr. King's dream was not only to have legal civil rights for African Americans, but also economic justice for all poor marginalized groups in the US. And one of the demands of that march was for, quote, a massive federal program to train and place all unemployed workers, Negro and white, on meaningful and dignified jobs at decent wages. So fast forwarding to today, we're in a period of historically low national unemployment. So, and my first question to the group is, why would you all say that there is a continuing struggle for jobs? And feel free in your answers to focus on a particular community, and let's go ahead and start with Algernon.
Great, thank you. I'm going to address the Black population, the continuing jobs crisis for Black Americans. And when I talk about the unemployment rate, I focus a lot on the annual rate, the 12-month average. The Black unemployment rate can jump up and down a lot month to month. But what we're really interested in is long-term sustained economic conditions, right? We want long-term low unemployment to have a healthy Black community. So the good news is that the unemployment rate today is historically low for Black people. So that's a positive. The bad news is that it's twice the white rate, about twice the white rate. And in 1963, the Black unemployment rate was also about twice the white rate. And that's part of the reason that the 1963 march was titled the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, because this structural inequality existed in 1963. And unfortunately, in all the 60 years, from then to now, we have maintained basically the Black unemployment rate being about twice the white unemployment rate. So this structural inequality, we've made no progress on. We haven't broken this 2-to-1 relationship. Right now, if you kind of average the Black unemployment rate over the year, the Black unemployment rate is running a little bit below 6%. And this is historically low. This is good news. However, over the last 60 years, the median unemployment rate for whites is about 5%. So the Black unemployment rate is still above the white median. And you really can't call an unemployment rate that's above the median as a low rate. So this is why I say that the Black unemployment rate ranges from high unemployment to very high unemployment to extremely high unemployment. We have never had low Black unemployment in the last 60 years. But we know it's possible because the white unemployment rate for 31 of the last 60 years has been 5% or lower, often significantly lower. So we know that low unemployment is possible for Black communities. We just have to have the policies to enact. And so the struggle for jobs for Black people will continue until we actually have low unemployment for Black people.
Thanks so much, Algernon, for introducing some really important nuance into this discussion around unemployment and what low employment actually covers and what it's leaving out, those discussions. Brittany, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and then we can go to Noelle and Ted.
Yeah, so I'd say we do have a continuing struggle for jobs when we look at the employment situation of American Indians and Alaska Natives, and especially those who are living in Indian country. So we are seeing that Native individuals who live in or near tribal land, so that's like a reservation, a pueblo, a village, a rancheria, their average unemployment rate is twice as high as the national average and more than any other racial or ethnic group. And there can be many reasons for that. So I'd say first, this is a group that has been oppressed for generations. They've had so much economic loss from losing their lands, from being forced to relocate to areas that usually had fewer valuable resources, to losing one of their major food sources, the bison. And studies have shown that it still affects them economically today. They had their children sent to boarding schools far away from home for assimilation. They weren't allowed to practice their culture or language. So this is a population that has had to overcome a lot of hardships, and it has led to an intergenerational effect on Native communities. But with that said, today there are 574 federally recognized tribes. They are sovereign nations. Many have their own tribal governments, their own constitutions, councils, courts, and many of them are working toward diversifying their economy and revitalizing their culture. So with so many Native nations, they all have their own economic situation. They're all have their unique situation. Some are doing well, while some do have really high unemployment rates. And I'd say a large part of this is likely because of a lack of job opportunities, especially in the remote areas, and a lack of startup capital to start businesses, which could bring in jobs. There are other challenges too, like any other individual, like lacking childcare accessibility and affordability, lacking reliable transportation. They could be facing physical or mental disabilities, or facing the cultural expectation to stay at home and take care of the family. So for American Indians and Alaska Natives, they are facing the same challenges as others today in securing a job, while at the same time they are overcoming these economic hardships that have affected their families for generations. And that all plays a part into why there's this continual struggle for jobs in Native communities.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brittany. Noelle?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So I want to talk a little bit about youth and young adults, and for purposes of this discussion, defining that group as ages 16 to 24. So when it comes to young people, I would say unemployment is borderline historically low. Even before the pandemic, youth unemployment was more than twice the overall unemployment rate. By mid-22, when unemployment overall was kind of settling back to pre-pandemic levels, young people were still facing unemployment around 8-9%. And a year later, it hasn't dropped much. And that fits historical patterns. After the Great Recession, it took almost 10 years for youth unemployment rate to recover. And still that rate is much higher than the rate for folks over 24. Second, unemployment data is misleading for young people, since by definition, you have to have had a job in order to show up on the unemployment rolls. So young people who are looking for their first formal jobs entering the workforce aren't reflected there. And there's an estimated 4.8 million young people in the US right now who are neither in school or in jobs. And a huge percentage of those don't show up in the unemployment data. Third, all of the systemic isms, such as what Brittany and Algernon talked about, also fall on youth. Won't belabor all of those details, but youth are not immune to those, and they also deal with adultism as well. And lastly, I think we need to reframe the struggle for jobs as a struggle for quality jobs. And this is just what I've heard directly from young people. And I did some research last year and interviewed several of them. What I heard is that many of the jobs that are available to young people aren't actually worth the investment of time and resources it takes to actually work those jobs. I think sometimes as adults, we treat young people as if they don't have adult responsibilities, but many do. And, they need money to handle a lot of those things. But, imagine you're 18, you have minimal work experience, you get that first job in food service or retail, like many of us did. You spend 2 hours, $5 round trip on city buses for a 4-hour shift, maybe $10 an hour. You come home with $35 and you spend 6 hours of your day, and maybe rearrange childcare and those things. And I think we understand those challenges for older adults, and often don't think about that with young people. So they deserve better. Honestly, this generation's seen fights for workers' rights, for better wages. They've watched their parents during the pandemic, struggle, and seen how precarious employment can be. And so sometimes they have to accept low quality jobs, but they don't find it acceptable, and neither should the rest of us.
Thanks so much. Yeah. Ted, go for it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I mean, so while the unemployment rate is, across Appalachia, for instance, is relatively low in most places, I think this gives a false impression that the Appalachia has a healthy economy and labor market. The truth is, the region has struggled for decades to build a diverse and robust economy, and the result has been sort of a paucity of jobs. And this has caused people to drop out of the workforce altogether, or seek remuneration in the informal economy. So we've had a long-term structural unemployment problem that has persisted for decades. And this has caused people to move out of the region with large population losses, especially in Central Appalachia, which is sort of like the coal fields areas of Southern West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, parts of Tennessee, and Southwest Virginia. So even when that unemployment low as it is now, fewer Appalachian adults are in the workforce. And I think that's one of the big issues, because you can't look at the unemployment rate when you're looking at Appalachia right now. Like in West Virginia, the one state that all the counties are officially part of the Appalachian Regional Commission's definition of Appalachia, is like 3.5%. Now, when you start digging into the numbers and say, okay, what if Central Appalachia, for instance, what if the share of if the labor force participation rate was the same as the national average? And let's assume that all of those folks that are out of the workforce, that could be in the workforce, if the region had the same labor force participation, let's assume that they were included as unemployed. Next thing you know, you're going to see our unemployment rate, in Central Appalachia shoot from about 6% in that area all the way up to 28%. So that's a very big difference. And I think it highlights one of these long persistent problems when you have an area that's concentrated in natural resource extraction, like this area that has had sort of a mono economy and it hasn't had a diverse base of growth. We've had a lot of growth, but as one historian said, we haven't had a lot of development. And with that, a diverse job experience. And then you have a cycle of hopelessness, poverty in those areas. People become very unhealthy too. And then people that work in very physically demanding jobs, like in Appalachia, tend to have higher disability rates. And they tend to live in places with low population density, where it's very difficult to get transportation, to get a job. So when we're looking at the unemployment rate, just reiterate again, it's not something that gives us a good barometer of the health of the region, because when you start digging in the numbers, and if we just had this same share of people participating in the workforce that are counted as either employed or unemployed in the official statistics, the situation would look a lot more dire. And that's a long-term struggle. And that's why we think it's so important that we have a targeted program to bring jobs into the area and to provide a sense of identity and a sense of community and self-worth.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. What's really, coming through already is just this, the fact that, national unemployment rates especially really do obscure these, structural and systemic disparities for a lot of different communities and regions. And so it's really, really important that folks are paying attention and digging into the national rates and looking beyond those, right, when we're thinking about jobs and economic security and prosperity and whatnot. So moving on to the next question, the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality has been a strong advocate for a national subsidized employment program. And in case it's helpful for the audience, we typically describe subsidized employment as a program where the government is subsidizing all or part of a worker's wages for a period of time, while also providing vital on-the-job training and other wraparound supports like childcare and transportation assistance. So I'd love to hear from the panel. Do you all see this as a useful approach to creating jobs for communities struggling with high rates of joblessness today, like the ones that you touched on? And let's start with Brittany for this one, and then others can feel free to chime in by unmuting yourselves, or I can, continue to call on you.
Yeah, so I would say for Native nations, this could be a useful approach because it is something that they've been a part of before and currently. So in the past, the Civilian Conservation Corps, they subsidized employment for about 85,000 Native men as part of their Indian division. This was back in the 1930s. And these employees were put to work on improving public infrastructure in or near their tribal lands. So they're building dams, roads, fences. They also worked as firefighters or hospital orderlies, community gardeners. So this was great at providing jobs that at the same time, it was improving their community through public service, also improving their tribal operations. And I'd say another example is through the Tribal TANF program. So this is a public assistance program, temporary assistance for needy families, and this is specifically ran by the tribes through TANF block grants. So some tribal TANF programs have implemented subsidized employment programs, and they're given more flexibility than, say, a state TANF program. So when they're designing the program and they're defining jobs, they can cover culturally relevant activities. So for example, like subsistence activities like hunting, fishing, and gathering, other activities like pottery making, beading, wood carving. So these would not fit within a state's TANF program job definition, but it would in a tribal program. So I think that's a great example of something working today. There are more than 70 tribal TANF programs right now, and they allow the Native nations to exercise their sovereignty and self-governance to administer the program in a way that works best for their community. They know their community the best. So I would say the tribal TANF program in the past Civilian Conservation Corps could both serve as models to help address joblessness.
Yeah, thanks so much. Ted or Noelle, either of you have any thoughts on this? Want to chime in?
Yeah, I think, I'm speaking sort of on behalf of young people. We don't have young people here to speak for themselves, so I just want to bring in some of their voices. Young people from Project 1224 steering committee in New York City. I pulled this quote from them. It says, "We envision a city in which each young person is empowered to discover their own definition of success through real world learning experiences and universal internships." So that's the goal. To that end, my colleague at CLASP, Kathy Tran, recently put out a paper. It's noted in the chat there. This is her research, not mine. I want to make sure credit is given where it's due. But that paper is calling for a national youth subsidized employment program. Because when it comes to K-12 education, Medicare, Social Security, most people, those systems are under attack from some corners these days. But broadly speaking, most people agree educating our children, caring for our elders is important, just part of the social contract. And I think that should be true for providing career opportunities for young people entering adulthood as well. So a national subsidized employment program is not the only approach or a standalone approach. It would need to be designed to avoid a one-size-fits-all model, with elements specific to youth like those that Kathy outlines in her paper.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, I would just add that, a well-targeted program, especially connecting people to the workforce that may not have the skills today, or even in the classroom learning or on the job experience to help, improve their skills and make them more attractive to employers would be really important. We've had programs in the past that have been very successful, like the Civilian Conservation Corps and the WPA. But really making sure that we're focused on people with large barriers to work, which is one of the main reasons in Appalachia people aren't able to. We have an opioid crisis that has made this whole problem much, much worse than even it was a decade ago. So, dealing with those targeted population, whether it's people coming in and out of the criminal justice system, whether it's people with caregiving responsibilities, whether it's people that, are injured but are able to work in some capacity, working hands-on with those folks in these remote areas is just really important.
Yeah, thanks so much. Algernon, anything you want to add?
Yeah, a good bit. First, I want to go back to an earlier point that Ted made about the population in Appalachia, how the unemployment rate undercounts the actual amount of joblessness. And you see this with any population or in any community that suffers from high levels of unemployment. People are going to stop looking for work because they've been rejected thousands of times, or because they look around and they see there are no jobs in their communities. So for this reason, to be counted as unemployed by the BLS, you have to be actively looking for work. But when you're in an economically depressed community, there's no point in actively looking for work. So, Ted talked about how the unemployment rate undercounts joblessness in Appalachia, but it also undercounts joblessness in the Black population because many Black communities are also basically economically depressed communities. So similarly, the official unemployment rate, even though it's high, it's above the white median, it is still significantly undercounting Black joblessness. So you really have to kind of double the Black unemployment rate to get a good sense of the level of joblessness that Black America is experiencing. So that's kind of attaching to that. But on the issue of subsidized employment, it is a really effective and efficient method of job creation. First, it addresses the problem. People don't have a job, you give them a job. It's important for people to realize that there are a number of policies that we implement that are supposedly to help people get jobs, but they're not based on this model. Sometimes people do job training alone, and you provide people with training, but then they get new skills, but they don't get a job because there's no job connected to the job training. Subsidized employment, only if there's a job are we going to spend money. And once people are in the program, they're getting a job. You know, they need a job, you give them a job. The other thing that we often do is give tax breaks to wealthy people or corporations in the hopes that they will create jobs for disadvantaged populations. And often that's just a windfall for those wealthy individuals, and little or no jobs are created. So with subsidized employment, because you never spend any money if you don't create a job, it's highly efficient. There's no waste like some of the other approaches that we have. And getting back to really, I think what everyone is saying on this panel, another benefit is that it can be targeted. Macro stimulus policies often cannot be targeted. You know, if the Fed cuts interest rates, the Fed can't direct more job creation to Flint, Michigan than to Ann Arbor, Michigan. You know, Flint, Michigan, historically high levels of joblessness, and Ann Arbor, typically low. But the Federal Reserve policy can't just, can't address that disparity. A national targeted subsidized employment program actually can. It can be designed to address, okay, Flint needs job creation, we're going to put the resources in Flint as opposed to Ann Arbor. Or we'll, create a program that will be helpful, as people were saying, for people with disabilities or for young people, et cetera. So it's a really important and an effective tool because there's little waste and because we can really target it to where there's the greatest need.
Yeah, thanks so much. What's really coming through is just like the importance of subsidized employment being able to be, targeted and also to be able to be adapted, right, for different community needs and different circumstances and situations. And this is, y'all had already started to touch on this a bit, so feel free to continue to build upon what you were already saying around what are some of the elements that can make a subsidized employment program most effective for the populations that you're focused on. And we could all probably name many, but if everyone could just maybe name one at a time, and then we can always circle back if you want to add more to the collective list. And thanks, Brittany. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can. So I'll say, have Native Nations part of the development from the beginning. If there is a federal subsidized program being created, have them be part of the discussions early on. You could also consider holding like listening sessions at tribal convenings or national conferences. I would just say, make sure you're gathering input from the beginning if you're developing a federal subsidized employment program.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great one.
I would say the same for young people, youth leadership in design of the program, policy implementation, programming. It's about them. They've got the insights that we need.
Yeah, the only thing I would build on is what Algernon said. We don't want a train and pray program. We have to make sure that people are getting connected to jobs, and that certain people who, may not feel, they might need more soft skills training too, and those type of things, even if it's getting a GED or whatever that's needed. Focusing on that is just really important because you have to meet people where they are.
So again, thinking about the Black population, unfortunately, you can find relatively high levels of unemployment for all the Black subpopulations. But I think it's important that if we have a subsidized employment program, to make sure that we have policies and programs that are inclusive for returning citizens, people who are informally incarcerated. Our mass incarceration policies have devastated many Black communities and been particularly harmful to Black men. And in our society, generally, we tend to create a lot of barriers and obstacles for people who are formerly incarcerated to participate productively in the society. So we can't design create a subsidized employment program and then also put barriers to prevent people who are formerly incarcerated from being able to participate. So that's really important. I'll add another thing. We need child support. Many people, as people have alluded, have kids, and they need child care, child support to fully participate in employment. So to the extent that we can add that to the programs and support that also, that's useful.
Yeah, thanks so much. So definitely hearing a lot of consensus around meeting people where they're at and addressing any barriers to employment, getting input from the folks that would be participating in the subsidized employment programs, making sure the programs are connected to actual jobs, which is the beauty of subsidized employment, right, as an approach. Anything else that anyone wants to add?
Transportation can be useful.
Mhm.
I was just reading about this program, and unfortunately, it was a subsidized employment program that was connected to an anti-violence initiative, and unfortunately, for the young men in the program, there were rival gangs nearby, so they had to figure out how to effectively transport the participants to work without them having to, get in contact with some rival gang so that they could participate. But more generally, in many of our cities, we don't have adequate public transportation, and many of these people suffering from joblessness, poverty, et cetera, have need assistance getting from where they live to where the jobs are. So transportation, some sort of transportation assistance is often useful.
Yeah, definitely.
I would add some kind of advocacy training and knowing your rights, understanding labor rights in the workplace, and then having the resources available for folks to access support and enforcement of those. Really important.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing I would just add to it, one thing that could be very important is pre-apprenticeship programs. And there's a lot of federal money, as everybody knows, that's going around, whether it's in the infrastructure bill or the IRA, and working on community benefit agreements to, help target some of these populations within all of these projects could be an avenue in the meantime until we have a national subsidized program.
Yeah, thanks. So we'll move on to the next question, just because I am realizing that we are, rapidly running out our clock here. But this discussion is so great so far. So it's important for people to be aware that, when we allow people to live without a job, we're denying them much more than an income. What are the benefits beyond an income that a job can provide to individuals? And we can, again, take turns and identify one thing at a time and can always circle back. And Noelle, do you want to start?
Sure. I'll say just a sense of competence and ability that we all want to have, the satisfaction that can take on a challenge and accomplish something.
Yeah, thanks. Brittany or Algernon, do you want to go?
Yeah, there's so many. It's hard to know where to start. But I'll say something that might be a little controversial. You know, there are many people who advocate for a universal basic income, and that's really positive. I think as long as it doesn't take away other types of sources of income, it can be really positive. But it's important for people to recognize that an income is not the same as a job. And with a job, for example, you learn skills and you have work connections, social networking, and that can lead you to a higher paying job, a job with different responsibilities. So having a job can be an important stepping stone to further upward mobility. But if you just give a person an income, you're really not, you're giving them that access to that potential for upward mobility. Now, of course, not all jobs are good jobs, but some jobs and more jobs do provide this opportunity for upward mobility.
Yeah, thanks for making that point.
So I was just going to add that, you know, the importance of, you know, camaraderie with people at work and getting to know and being around people is such an important part of what it means to be human too. And I think, especially over the last 40 years, we have a very atomized society where we're all individuals. Monty Python reference there, but you know, and I think like making sure that we're doing something meaningful with our time and getting paid well is an important part of one's identity too, and who they are and how they're respected in their communities.
Yeah, thanks. Brittany, I know that you were going to say something earlier.
Yeah, I'll just add on to what everyone's saying. You know, it just helps build those connections, you know, outside of the family, you know, to find someone who could be a reference for you for another job, or to write a letter of recommendation for you to go to school. You know, having a job and being part of that work community can help, you know, with the upward mobility that Algernon was mentioning.
Yeah, thanks. And so, you know, building on this question a bit, what are some of the benefits that actually I'm going to switch it up a little bit. So given some of the, you know, individual and community wide benefits that y'all have touched on already, would you say that subsidized employment programs are worth the investment? I know that Algernon had, you know, a little earlier kind of spoke to why they're a really effective approach. Maybe we can start with you, and in case you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I want to go back to this evaluation that I just read. It was done by some economists at the University of Chicago and some other economists, the Rapid Employment and Development Initiative in Chicago. And that's a program, again, it's a program to combat gun violence, and it subsidized employment and cognitive behavioral therapy combined. You know, everyone involved recognized that the subsidized employment part is essential to the program being effective. So we really have to put it in there. But it was created to address the issue of gun violence. But more generally, we know that economic hardship is correlated with crime and violence. So subsidized employment can deliver community benefits by helping to reduce crime in communities. The other thing for this specific program, the economists found that it had that the social benefits of reduced crime in the neighborhoods was worth 10 times the amount that the program costs. So it's just a tremendously promising and effective program to both address joblessness and to address crime. And with such a positive evaluation, we really need it not just as an experiment in Chicago, but really in pretty much every major city. And it more than pays for itself.
Yeah, thanks so much. That's incredible. Ted or Noelle? Oh, Brittany. Yeah.
Yes, I'll just add, that I think any community would welcome more job opportunities, especially if those wages are being subsidized. For Native nations, they are looking to diversify their economies, and this is one way they could do that. They can build into their public infrastructure that they already have going on, or if they want to bring in more for-profit businesses, this is one way to do it, and to have, those subsidized wages to get them in. So yes, I would say this would be worth the investment if it would work out.
Thanks. Yeah, definitely. Noelle or Ted?
Don't have much to add. My answer is kind of yes.
Yeah,
Me too.
sometimes you don't need to say anymore because it is so evident. All right, so we're coming up on our last couple questions before we turn to the audience Q&A. I'd love to hear from each of you. What's your favorite subsidized employment program that has been enacted? And I know it's a hard question, so just pick one of them. And actually, I would love to interject too and say that for me, it's the New Hope program in Milwaukee. They provided a holistic package of work-based supports that led to positive outcomes, not only for employment, but also for the well-being of participants' families and their communities. And yeah, I'd love to hear from y'all what your favorites are. Ted, let's start with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, being from Appalachia and West Virginia, it's hard not to pick the Civilian Conservation Corps as, I think there's many lessons to learn from that, things to do very differently in today's more modern economy. But the idea that we can do big things, that when we want to employ people, we can. And I think that bigism and that idealism has been lost for a very long time. We tend to just sort of provide carrots to the private sector and hope that it happens. But I think, and I can't stress this enough, I'm really a big proponent of public jobs, specifically federal jobs, because when we look at equity and those things, those jobs tend to be really good paying with good benefits, especially for people that don't have high school or any college degrees. And when we're targeting these people, this is where we're going. We're not trying to hire people out of college to be in subsidized jobs. We're trying to target people that are harder to employ. And I think the CCC was just remarkable, and it's left a legacy of things that we all enjoy every single day.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Algernon, how about you?
I have to jump in because I'm going to talk about the Civilian Conservation Corps also. So the Civilian Conservation Corps employed about 200,000 African-American young men. And again, this is a Depression era program. This is one of the sort of new deal programs to respond to the high level of joblessness during the Depression. And many of our parks and other, many of our parks were constructed by the Civilian Conservation Corps. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and I only recently learned that the National Arboretum was constructed by Black young men in the Civilian Conservation Corps. And I just happened to have been at the National Arboretum this weekend, enjoying watching the state trees of all the 50 states. So I have to give it a plug because I think the Arboretum is great, and I was just there. So Civilian Conservation Corps.
Love that.
That's also my answer.
I've done some work on summer youth employment programs, and I just again want to bring in a young leader named Kylan Kwek-Rup, who's from Teens Take Charge. And she explained to me about summer youth employment programs. She said it's about, quote, how many students can we get into meaningful job placements? How many students are leaving the summer feeling inspired for the school year? How many students have more of an idea of what they want to do in the future? And so programs that do that are my favorite. Often that's in summer youth employment programs, but not exclusively. But I think that vision that goes beyond just a job is really important.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I'm going to squeeze in one more question before we turn to Q&A. So what needs to happen for a national subsidized employment program to be created? And if anyone, I can, let's maybe start with Noelle.
That's a big question.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, I think public will is a big part of it. Just some narrative change, funding at scale, equity strategies built in from the beginning. And I also think focus on changing employer behavior, because all the programming in the world only goes so far. If employers are choosing to discriminate, to create hostile work environments, those kinds of things. So I think we need to be attacking this from both sides.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Algernon, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, basically just ditto to everything that Noel said.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need more recognition of the benefits of subsidized employment. We need more advocacy for it. We need more people recognizing how the national unemployment rate is hiding the quite significant joblessness in the communities that we're talking about.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is such a harmonious panel with everyone in so much agreement. Brittany or Ted, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'll just build off what Noelle was saying about discrimination. I do think a component of this program, I mean, it should consider like mandatory anti-discrimination training for employers who are involved, maybe for the staff as well. Because for like American Indians and Alaska Natives, a lot of them live outside of their tribal land. So they're out in urban areas working various jobs. And so a program that has that kind of anti-discrimination training could help, make sure everyone feels like they belong and that they're treated fairly. Because if they enter a job and they feel like they don't belong, they're going to drop out and then the program's not successful. So I would say, that is a big component to, creation and also making sure it's successful.
Thanks so much. Alrighty. Well, yeah, thank you so much for that discussion. I'm so sorry, Ted. I think we have to jump to Q&A now, but maybe later on, if we have time, we can circle back. So jumping into that, and thank you again, just everyone, for the really wonderful discussion so far. So I will just start at the top and go from there with the submitted question. So this one was submitted by an anonymous attendee, and the question is, unfortunately, undesirable jobs still need to be done. Many are low skill, and so the pay is comparable. What is the balance between needing people to do these jobs and providing a living wage comparable to the skill level required for them?
I'll jump in there since I was talking about quality at the beginning. I want to push back on the idea of paying wages comparable to skill levels. If the jobs are needed, then people filling those jobs should be compensated accordingly. When employers aren't compensating their workers well, then the rest of society picks up the tab, whether that's through public benefits or just other ways that folks have to try to fill in the gaps. And I also think that, when I think about young people in particular, there are other things that they're looking for. The young women that I quoted were talking about meaningful work experiences, access to career paths, opportunities to discover what are my talents and what are the things that, that I'm good at and that I can contribute to the world. And so if we're building in mentorship, access to opportunities, connections to post-secondary education, all of those kinds of things, then that return on the young person's investment of their time, and hassle to work that job, that return for them is greater as well.
Yeah, thanks so much. Alrighty, if anyone else wants to jump in and add to that, please feel free to unmute. Otherwise, I will jump to the next question. Alrighty. So thank you again for that question. Next one is from Joe Hughes, and it is a question for Ted. Has the national media narrative's fixation on coal mining in Appalachia been counterproductive to policy outcomes? I believe some researchers have estimated that there are more people in Appalachia working at Dollar General than in coal mines.
That's a huge question. Yeah, I mean, I think people have to realize too that if you go back into the 70s, there was lots of coal mining jobs in the area, manufacturing jobs, and if you just had a high school degree or less, you had above average wages nationally. That's pretty amazing. And that doesn't exist today. The state of West Virginia, Weirton Steel was the biggest employer, 14,000 people back in the 70s. Today, it is actually a hospital, but it's Walmart is number 2. And people got paid more back in the 70s for their job per hour than they do at Walmart at the lowest end. So I think people have to realize too that these were good paying jobs if you could get them, and people are going to hold on to that. And it's very important. But yeah, coal takes up a big space of that discussion because we have the region in a lot of places has had sort of a mono economy. It's had a lot of growth, but sort of a colonial type economy with large absentee landowners as well. And it's a huge part of a lot of people's identity. A lot of people feel like, I might not have done a lot in life, but I know I contributed by mining coal every day that powered our industrial revolution, that empowered us in World War II, put the lights on the East Coast and DC and places like that. So I think it's a very difficult thing, and that's why it takes up so much space. Obviously, we need to move towards clean energy and those things, and it's a difficult process. But I think, that's important to understand. Back to that identification stuff that Algernon talked about. And the Dollar General jobs, yes, there are probably more people that are working in Dollar General, but those are much lower paying than a $90,000 a year coal mining job, even though there's so few. And I think people really want to bring back those really good manufacturing jobs, at least, or good goods producing jobs that they had in the past. And I think, unions have to play the large role, because when unions played a large role in these rural areas, they were very labor friendly, progressive areas. And then when politics shifted and climate change became a big issue, it brought in a conflict between those two things that hasn't been reconciled today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ted. So moving on to the next question from Anonymous. Can the panelists say more about the targeted job creation opportunities in the federal legislation that we have won during the Biden-Harris administration? Are there some good experiments happening that we should be lifting up and seeing as models?
So I can share an example. I do know that during this current administration, there was the Indian Youth Service Corps that started last year. So what this is, it's paying Native youth to work on environmental and conservation programs in their tribal lands or their ancestral lands. So it's to help, maintain that their traditional ecological knowledge and giving them work experience and income, and helping them early on as their youth. So I think this is one program. It's pretty new. I think we'll be keeping our eyes on it to see, what the outcomes are and see if it could serve as a model in other aspects.
Well, I will just add that shameless plug here that the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Inequality, we just released our 50-year look back of subsidized employment programs and models. So if anyone is interested, please do check out that resource. And it is quite the span of programs over the years. So hopefully it will be a helpful resource. And okay, so I think we will try to squeeze in at least one more of these questions. So this is from Destiny Anderson. What economic legislative agendas and bills are making the continuing struggle for jobs more difficult on already struggling communities? If anyone wants to jump in and maybe, speak to a part of that, even if, maybe, yeah, Algernon.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. There are many things, but getting back to, I think, the first question, the fact that we haven't increased the federal minimum wage is not helpful. These jobs would be better and more effective for families and communities if we had a higher federal minimum wage, and also, getting rid of the tip minimum wage and other policies that enforce sub-minimum wages. So, good jobs, as Noel was saying, good jobs are not surprisingly more attractive than bad jobs. So, and having better wages as well as better benefits makes jobs better for workers and better for, like I said, better for communities.
Yeah, thanks so much, Algernon. That's such a great point to lift up. And we are very much nearing our time. Maybe we can squeeze in just one more. So this is from Anonymous, this is from Anonymous. People often do not vote in their best interests. Those who have blocked the new CCC and other such efforts are often put into office by those who would benefit most. How to change that?
Could you repeat the question? There was a part that I didn't hear.
Yeah, so people often do not vote in their best interests, and those who have blocked the new CCC and other efforts are often put into office by those who would benefit most. How should we change that? Maybe if anyone wants to give a kind of a broader call to action as well to close things out.
Ted, you were involved in advocating for the new Civilian Conservation Corps. Maybe you should respond.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a large advocacy group and people involved in that, and could help make the case much stronger. And I think my big problem with a lot of the proposals is that they're sort of AmeriCorps Plus, which are mostly geared towards college kids, and that is not the people that are population that we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on the people that we sort of highlighted in this panel discussion. So that's very important. And I think over the long term, to find the political power to make the change that we see necessary, especially throughout the whole entire United States, not just pockets of places, we are going to have a rebuilt labor movement. And that's why we had the New Deal. That's why these programs that we're talking about, labor was growing. It was robust all across the country. That was before we had red states and blue states and all of this. And that to me is just so fundamental to get where we are. So rapidly increasing the amount of unionization we have in this country can lift up those opportunities when people see that those things are what bring them together, basically the working class. I think we're going to be able to get where we want to go when we begin to make progress on that front.
And
Thanks
just
so
to
much, Ted.
Piggyback off of that, yes, we can build a national movement, because unfortunately the problem of joblessness can be found in every state, including the District of Columbia. So for example, the DC Fiscal Policy Institute just released a report that showed that in the whitest section of DC, the unemployment rate is like 3.6%. And in the section of DC with the largest proportion of the Black population, it's over 9%. So even in a small state/city like DC needs it, as well as every single other state, you have these pockets of joblessness. So that's why we need a national program, and that's why a national movement is really possible, because every state can benefit from a subsidized employment program.
Thank you both so much for closing us out on such important notes. We have reached the end of our time altogether, and actually a little bit over. But yeah, thank you everyone so much. Thank you to our wonderful panelists for this fantastic discussion, to Algernon, Emma, Eric, and everyone else involved in putting all of this together, and of course to our amazing audience for all of the really engaging and thoughtful questions. The commemoration will continue next week on Wednesday at 1 p.m. with a panel discussion on the continuing struggle for freedom, as Algernon mentioned earlier. And please do remember to register for this event if you haven't already. And thank you so much, everyone, and hope you can take care and have a good rest of your day.